A new dawn at La Perfection. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a warm glow over the bustling city. La Perfection, the renowned Michelin-starred restaurant, stood as a beacon of culinary excellence, drawing in the rich and famous. Its sleek, modern architecture glinted in the late afternoon light, hinting at the opulence within. The sound of laughter and clinking glasses spilled out from the dining room, where elegantly dressed patrons savored exquisite dishes crafted by the talented Chef Daniel. Chef Daniel, a 45-year-old culinary prodigy, was known for his brilliance in the kitchen, as well as his fiery temper. His salt and pepper hair framed a face that could charm and intimidate in equal measure, with piercing blue eyes that seemed to scrutinize every movement. He had climbed the ranks of the culinary world through sheer talent and relentless ambition, but along the way, he had developed a reputation for being a tyrant. Underneath the polished surface of the restaurant, the kitchen was a war zone, a place where dreams could be made or shattered in an instant. On this particular day, the atmosphere in the kitchen felt especially tense. The heat from the stoves mingled with the aroma of roasted meats and sautéed vegetables, creating an intoxicating scent that hung heavily in the air. Line cooks hurried back and forth, each movement a carefully choreographed dance in response to Chef Daniel's commands. The pressure was palpable, and the slightest misstep could lead to public humiliation or worse. In the midst of this chaos, a newcomer entered the kitchen, a 68-year-old black woman named Grace. Her presence was serene, almost ethereal, and she carried herself with a quiet dignity that stood in stark contrast to the frenetic energy around her. Grace had taken on the role of a dishwasher, a position far removed from the glamorous life of a chef, yet she approached it with a sense of purpose. For her, this job was more than just a means to an end. It was an opportunity to bring light into a place that seemed shrouded in darkness. As she settled into her new role, Grace quickly observed the dynamics of the kitchen. The staff bustled about, their expressions a mix of concentration and fear. Chef Daniel ruled with an iron fist, his outbursts often leaving staff members shaken and defeated. She had seen young cooks reduced to tears and waitstaff humiliated for the slightest mistake, while others tiptoed around, wary of triggering his ire. Grace moved with a calm assurance that seemed to invite curiosity rather than disdain. On her first evening, Grace watched as Daniel berated a line cook named Alex for a plating error. The young man's face blanched as he stood frozen, the weight of Daniel's words pressing down on him like a heavy fog. "This isn't good enough," Daniel roared, thrusting a plate of scallops in Alex's direction. "You call this Michelin star quality? Pathetic." The plate went flying, crashing onto the floor in a symphony of shattered dreams and broken shellfish. The kitchen fell silent, the staff acutely aware of the danger that loomed over them. Grace felt a pang of sympathy for Alex. She had seen the passion that young chef had for his craft, yet here he was, a victim of Daniel's relentless cruelty. A fire ignited within her, a quiet resolve to change the toxic environment that had permeated La Perfection. As the evening continued, Grace fell into a rhythm, her hands working methodically to wash and polish the dishes that flowed in from the dining room. With each plate she cleaned, she made a silent vow to support her fellow staff members, to uplift them where she could. Grace was no stranger to adversity. She had weathered storms in her life that would have broken many. Her experiences had taught her resilience, and she carried that strength into every task, no matter how menial. During a brief lull, Grace struck up a conversation with Sarah, a waitress who often seemed lost in her thoughts. "It's quite a place, isn't it?" Grace remarked, her voice soothing. "So much talent here, but it seems overshadowed by fear." Sarah sighed, glancing toward the kitchen where Daniel was still barking orders. "You have no idea. It's like walking on eggshells every day. He's a genius in the kitchen, but his ego, it's out of control. People are afraid to make mistakes, afraid to be themselves." Grace nodded, understanding the weight of Sarah's words. Fear can be a powerful motivator, but it can also stifle creativity. Talent flourishes in an environment of support and respect. Sarah raised an eyebrow, intrigued by Grace's perspective. You seem different. Most people just try to survive around here. With a soft smile, Grace replied, I believe that kindness can change everything. Sometimes, it just takes one person to stand up for what's right. As the night wore on, the staff continued their work under the oppressive gaze of Chef Daniel. Grace found herself slipping into a pattern of resilience. She would wash the dishes and offer kind words of encouragement to the young cooks and waitstaff when Daniel was distracted. Her warmth was like a balm in the midst of chaos, and the energy in the kitchen began to shift, albeit subtly. One evening, while Grace was immersed in her work, she overheard Daniel lambasting the pastry chef for an unapproved dessert. What is this? You think you can just throw together some random ingredients and call it gourmet? Get it together or get out. The pastry chef's face flushed with embarrassment as she hurried away, and Grace felt a surge of anger rise within her. That night, after the last customer had left, Grace gathered the staff in the break room. Listen, she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. I know it's hard working under Daniel, but we are all talented individuals who deserve respect. We can't let his fear dictate our passion. Let's support one another. We can create an environment where we uplift each other, where we can shine without fear. Some staff members exchanged glances, uncertainty clouding their faces, but Sarah nodded with conviction. You're right, Grace. We shouldn't have to live in fear. We need to take back our kitchen. As they talked, a sense of solidarity began to blossom. It was a small flicker of hope in an otherwise darkened space. They each shared their stories, their aspirations, and the dreams they had when they first entered the culinary world. Laughter mingled with tears as they began to realize that they were not alone in their struggles. Grace's quiet leadership sparked a sense of camaraderie among the staff. Her wisdom resonated deeply, and they all started to view her as a mentor. They began to voice their concerns to each other more openly, and little by little, they started to reclaim their agency. Grace knew it would take time, but she felt the tides beginning to shift, and she was determined to ride that wave of change. The next day, as the kitchen fired up for another evening of service, Grace took her place at the dishwasher station with a renewed sense of purpose. She watched as the cooks prepared dishes with a bit more enthusiasm, their movements a reflection of the budding camaraderie they had cultivated. Even Alex, who had been so devastated by Daniel's outburst, approached his station with a glimmer of hope in his eyes. Grace, he said during a brief moment of downtime, thank you for being here. It's nice to know someone cares. I don't feel so alone anymore. Grace smiled warmly. You're not alone, Alex. We're all in this together, and we're going to make it through. As the evening progressed, the kitchen buzzed with energy, but the specter of Chef Daniel still loomed. Grace knew he wouldn't change overnight, and the path ahead would be fraught with challenges. But she was prepared to face those challenges head-on, with her newfound family of kitchen staff at her side. Grace's heart swelled with hope, and as she scrubbed the last of the dishes that night, she realized that this was just the beginning. The culinary world was a demanding one, but she felt an unwavering belief that change was coming, and it would be nothing short of transformational. The turning point. As dawn broke over the city, casting a golden hue on the streets, the staff at La Perfection found themselves trudging into the restaurant, fatigue etched on their faces. The night's events weighed heavily on their hearts. Among them was Grace, the elderly dishwasher whose serene demeanor belied the turmoil unfolding in the kitchen. For her, this job was not merely a means to earn a living. It was a sanctuary, a place where she could channel her love for cooking and connect with people, despite the harsh realities of her role. Grace had spent decades nurturing her culinary skills in her tiny kitchen at home, creating comfort food that fed not just the bodies, but also the souls of those she loved. Each recipe carried a story, a memory of laughter and togetherness, and it was this passion for food that propelled her into the chaotic world of La Perfection. She knew that her role as a dishwasher would rarely garner the spotlight, yet she believed that every dish served to the guests started from the moment the first ingredient was washed and prepared. As the day unfolded, the oppressive atmosphere in the kitchen was palpable. The memory of Chef Daniel's outburst lingered like a bitter aftertaste. Grace noticed the young line cooks, Alex and Sarah, whispering to each other during their breaks, their faces drawn and anxious. The seasoned sous chef, Marco, shuffled around, his usual spirited banter silenced under the weight of fear. In this culinary battlefield, Grace felt a tug at her heart, a compelling urge to uplift the spirits of her coworkers, who had become victims of Chef Daniel's ruthless reign. Determined to make a difference, Grace began her day with an act of kindness. As she scrubbed the dishes, she hummed softly, a soulful tune that seemed to transcend the chaos of the kitchen. The melody floated through the air, catching the attention of the other staff members. Slowly, smiles began to break through the gloom as the younger cooks exchanged glances, momentarily forgetting their dread. "Grace, what are you singing?" Sarah asked, leaning against the counter, a glimmer of curiosity in her eyes. "Oh, just an old song my mama used to sing while cooking," Grace replied, her voice warm and inviting. "It always reminded me that cooking is about love, not just food. We create with our hands, but it's our hearts that infuse the flavors." With that, Grace's gentle presence became a beacon of positivity. Throughout the morning, she shared snippets of her life and her passion for cooking, each story laced with laughter and resilience. She spoke of the joys of feeding her family, of gathering around the table, sharing not only meals but moments that forged unbreakable bonds. "Food is a language," she explained to the curious crew, "and each dish we prepare speaks of who we are and where we come from. Don't let anyone silence your voice in this kitchen." As the day wore on, the staff started to rally around Grace. They shared their own stories and passions, momentarily forgetting the shadow of Chef Daniel looming over them. Sarah recounted her grandmother's famous pie recipe, while Alex spoke of his dream to open a food truck that showcased his multicultural heritage. But all the while, the reality of Chef Daniel's mercurial temperament loomed large. With each passing hour, the kitchen braced itself for his inevitable storm. When the lunch rush hit, the cacophony of orders and sizzling pans drowned out their budding camaraderie, and soon the oppressive atmosphere returned. "Move it, move it," Chef Daniel barked, his voice cutting through the noise like a hot knife through butter. The kitchen snapped back into its frenzied rhythm, but as the orders piled up, so did the tension. Grace continued to work diligently, her hands moving rhythmically, washing and prepping ingredients with a quiet intensity. She watched as the line cooks hurriedly plated dishes, the air thick with pressure and anxiety. Suddenly, a loud crash reverberated through the kitchen as Chef Daniel hurled a plate of food across the room, its vibrant colors splattered against the wall. "This is unacceptable," he roared, his eyes blazing. "Do you even care about the standards of this restaurant? Who's responsible for this?" He turned on Marco, the sous chef, who stood frozen, eyes wide with shock. "You let this happen on your watch? Pathetic." The kitchen fell silent. The staff stood frozen, eyes darting nervously between Chef Daniel and Marco, who stammered an apology, but it did little to quell the chef's fury. The weight of his rage pressed down like a heavy cloak, and Grace felt an overwhelming need to intervene. She could no longer stand by as her coworkers were torn down by the chef's unrelenting vitriol. "Chef Daniel," Grace's voice, though soft, rang out with an authority that momentarily halted the chaos. All eyes turned to her, surprised. Daniel glared at her, astonished that anyone would dare interrupt his tirade. "You may think you're the king of this kitchen, but that doesn't mean you can treat people like dirt." Grace continued, her heart racing, but her resolve unshakable. "Every dish is made with care, and every person here deserves respect. You're pushing them beyond their limits, and it shows." For a moment, the room held its breath, the tension crackling in the air like static electricity. Chef Daniel's jaw tightened, his expression a mixture of fury and disbelief. "You're just a dishwasher. What do you know about running a kitchen?" Grace took a deep breath, holding her ground. "I may be just a dishwasher, but I understand the value of hard work and respect. You don't create excellence by tearing others down. You build it up, brick by brick, with teamwork and compassion." The kitchen remained silent, and for the first time, the staff began to rally behind Grace, murmurs of agreement echoing in the corners. Marco, emboldened by her courage, stepped forward. "Grace is right, Chef. We're all here for the same goal, to create amazing food and provide an unforgettable experience. But that starts with supporting one another." The challenge hung in the air, and Chef Daniel's face flushed with anger. Yet, as he scanned the room, he noticed something he had never seen before: the unity among his team. The very people he had belittled were standing tall, emboldened by Grace's words. "Get back to work," he barked, though there was a hint of uncertainty in his voice. "I don't need a lecture from you or anyone else in this kitchen." As the staff returned to their tasks, Grace felt a wave of relief wash over her. She had ignited a spark of change, but the battle was far from over. Chef Daniel was not a man easily swayed, and the dynamics in the kitchen had only just begun to shift. As the day turned into night, Grace continued her quiet revolution, fostering a sense of camaraderie among her coworkers. They began to confide in one another, sharing their hopes and dreams amid the clattering of pans and the sizzling of meat. Yet the specter of Chef Daniel still loomed large, and Grace knew that she would need a plan to truly affect change. The restaurant continued to operate under the weight of its oppressive atmosphere, but with each passing day, Grace's influence grew. The kitchen began to hum with a new energy, a quiet resistance against the tyrannical rule of Chef Daniel. They were a team, and no matter how hard he tried to break them, they would stand together. As she scrubbed the dishes late into the night, Grace reflected on her journey. It was a long road ahead, but she was determined to bring light into the darkness that had settled over La Perfection. The battle between respect and tyranny was far from over, but she was ready to face it head-on, armed with love, compassion, and an unwavering spirit. With her co-workers rallying behind her, Grace felt a sense of purpose igniting within her. Change was brewing, and soon it would boil over, transforming the very essence of the kitchen they all called home. The stirring of change. As the weeks progressed, the rhythm of La Perfection began to shift. Grace's quiet yet fierce stand against Chef Daniel's tyranny had sparked a subtle revolution. The staff grew closer, sharing not just their burdens, but also their passions, creating an unbreakable bond forged in the heat of the kitchen. With every plate that left the kitchen, a whisper of their unity accompanied it. Grace took the time to encourage each team member, celebrating their small victories, whether it was a perfectly seared scallop or a beautifully plated dessert. The younger cooks, Alex and Sarah, began to experiment with their dishes, inspired by Grace's belief in the art of cooking and its roots in love and family. The once muted kitchen now buzzed with laughter and creativity, transforming it into a haven of culinary artistry. Yet, shadows lingered in the corners. Chef Daniel remained a formidable presence, his arrogance fortified by years of success and a reputation that few dared to question. The cracks in his authority began to widen, but his pride blinded him to the shift happening around him. He remained a storm, unpredictable and volatile, constantly on the lookout for any sign of weakness in his team. One busy Friday night, the restaurant was fully booked, and the air was thick with anticipation. The clatter of plates and the symphony of sizzling pans filled the space, while the clamor of guests created a vibrant atmosphere. Grace could feel the energy, the excitement building among her coworkers as they prepared to take on the night. However, as the evening progressed, the tension in the kitchen began to mount. A crucial dish, a lobster bisque that had been a staple of La Perfection, had not come together as planned. The sauce was too thin, the flavor lacking the depth that guests had come to expect. Chef Daniel's eyes narrowed as he assessed the situation, and he quickly turned his gaze to Marco, the sous chef. "What is going on here?" Chef Daniel demanded, his voice sharp enough to cut through the din. "You're the one responsible for this disaster." Marco stood frozen, his heart racing. I'll fix it, chef. Just give me a moment." "No, you don't have a moment. Get it together, or I'll find someone who can." The chef's words echoed off the stainless steel walls, leaving Marco shaken and the rest of the kitchen tense with anxiety. The line cooks exchanged uneasy glances, their spirits dampening under the weight of Chef Daniel's rage. But Grace, observing from her station, felt the familiar surge of determination well up within her. This was a pivotal moment, a chance to show that they were more than just cogs in the machine. "Marco, let me help," Grace called out, her voice steady amidst the chaos. "We can whip up a new batch together. Just follow my lead." The kitchen fell silent again as Chef Daniel turned to Grace, a mix of disbelief and fury etched on his face. "You think a dishwasher can help in a critical moment like this?" Ignoring his disdain, Grace moved to Marco's side. "I've seen you work, Marco. You know how to make it right. Let's do this as a team." With renewed energy, the two of them began to create a new lobster bisque from scratch. Grace guided Marco through the process, her hands deftly chopping vegetables, her words infused with encouragement. "Remember the aromatics, the onions, garlic, and leeks. We want to build layers of flavor. You've got this." Slowly, the rhythm of their work began to restore the energy in the kitchen. The other cooks watched, their spirits lifting as they saw Grace's unwavering belief in Marco. The aroma of fresh ingredients filled the air, and soon, laughter replaced the tension. Even Chef Daniel paused, watching with a furrowed brow as his control slipped through his fingers. He opened his mouth to protest, but found himself at a loss for words. For the first time, he saw his team working not as fearful subordinates, but as a cohesive unit. As the new bisque simmered, Grace and Marco expertly crafted the dish. When it was finally ready, they plated it beautifully, garnishing it with a delicate sprig of chervil. Grace turned to Marco, her eyes sparkling with pride. "Let's serve it up with confidence." When the dish was presented to Chef Daniel, he hesitated, the fire in his eyes flickering for just a moment. He picked up the spoon and tasted the bisque. The flavors danced on his palate, rich, creamy, and undeniably satisfying. For a fleeting second, the hardness in his expression softened, but the vulnerability was quickly replaced by his typical arrogance. "I suppose it's decent," he grumbled, setting the dish down with an air of indifference. Yet the room buzzed with an undercurrent of triumph. As the night wore on, Grace felt a sense of solidarity swell within the kitchen. The staff began to take ownership of their roles, supporting one another through the rush. Their laughter echoed louder than the chef's harsh critiques, and the camaraderie blossomed. They began to create dishes that reflected their diverse backgrounds, introducing elements of their heritage into the menu. The guests were none the wiser to the turmoil behind the scenes, but they began to notice a change in the dining experience. Compliments flowed from tables, and the restaurant buzzed with excitement. The energy radiating from the kitchen became infectious, transforming the atmosphere of La Perfection into one of warmth and genuine hospitality. But despite the newfound spirit, Chef Daniel's pride would not allow him to acknowledge the shift. Instead, he became increasingly irritable, lashing out whenever something went awry. He made snide remarks about the new dishes, belittling the team's creativity. "This is not a playground. Stick to the classics." Grace felt the frustration mounting, but she also sensed an opportunity. If Chef Daniel would not adapt, they would have to find a way to work around him. Her fellow staff rallied together, secretly planning to incorporate more of their ideas into the menu, even if it meant risking Chef Daniel's wrath. In whispered huddles during breaks, they discussed their plans, sharing recipes and visions for new dishes. "We can't let him hold us back," Alex said one day, his voice resolute. "This is our restaurant too." As the days turned into weeks, the dishes they created started to tell a story. A fusion of flavors that echoed their lives, their struggles, and their triumphs began to grace the menu, slowly but surely. Dishes like Grandma's Sunday roast and street-style tacos began to appear alongside traditional favorites, delighting the guests and keeping them intrigued. But their rebellion didn't go unnoticed for long. Chef Daniel's sharp eyes caught wind of the changes, and he soon realized that his control over the kitchen was waning. One fateful evening, as Grace and Marco plated a new signature dish, crispy duck with cherry glaze, Chef Daniel erupted. "What is this?" he bellowed, his voice echoing through the kitchen. "You think you can just change the menu without my permission? This is an insult to la perfection." Marco, emboldened by Grace's earlier support, stepped forward. "Chef, we've been working hard to enhance our menu. The guests are responding well. They appreciate the creativity." Chef Daniel's face flushed crimson as he glared at Marco. "Creativity? You call this creativity? You're all just a bunch of amateurs playing chef, if you think for 1 second that you can run this kitchen better than I can." But Grace interjected, her voice calm but firm. "Chef, it's not about running the kitchen better. It's about creating a space where we can all shine together. We want to be proud of what we serve, not just meet standards." The kitchen grew quiet, each cook holding their breath, watching the confrontation unfold. Chef Daniel's eyes darted around the room, searching for allies. Yet, he found none. Each staff member had begun to stand united, and it was a sight he had never anticipated. "Is this how you want to run your kitchen?" he shouted, his frustration palpable. "A bunch of kids playing at being chefs. You're ruining everything I've built." Grace stepped closer, her heart pounding, but her resolve unwavering. "We respect what you've built, chef, but we're here too. We want to contribute, to help elevate la perfection together. It's not just your kitchen, it's ours." Silence fell, and for a brief moment, the tension in the air crackled like electricity. Grace could feel the collective heartbeat of her team, their unity palpable. This was a defining moment. Chef Daniel took a deep breath, and for the first time, uncertainty flickered in his eyes. He opened his mouth to respond, but instead, he turned on his heel and stormed out of the kitchen, the doors swinging behind him with a resounding bang. The moment he left, a wave of relief washed over the kitchen. Laughter erupted, breaking the tension that had suffocated them for too long. They had stood up to the chef together, and in that moment, they felt invincible. As the night continued, the kitchen hummed with renewed energy. Grace and Marco finished plating the duck, and together, they sent it out with a sense of pride. The guests would taste not just the food, but the spirit of the kitchen, the love and unity that had blossomed under Grace's guidance. Later that night, as the last plates were cleared and the guests began to depart, the kitchen crew gathered for a moment of celebration. Grace stood at the center, surrounded by her team, their faces lit with joy and relief. "Tonight was incredible," Grace said. "Rising tides." The camaraderie that blossomed in the kitchen that night felt like a spark igniting a wildfire. Grace stood before her team, her heart swelling with pride as they celebrated their small victories, laughter and camaraderie echoing through the space. "Tonight was incredible," Grace exclaimed, raising a glass of sparkling water in a toast. "We took risks, and we thrived. This is just the beginning." The staff erupted into cheers, the sound reverberating off the kitchen walls. Their joy was palpable, a beautiful symphony of unity in a once divided space. Even the tension that usually hung in the air felt lighter, as if Chef Daniel's stormy presence had been dispelled, at least for the moment. As they celebrated, Grace took a moment to reflect on how far they had come. The fear that had paralyzed the kitchen had transformed into a creative force, propelling them toward a future filled with possibilities. But she also knew that Chef Daniel would not remain silent for long. The real battle had just begun. The next day, As the sun rose over the bustling city, Grace arrived early to the restaurant. She needed to prepare for the challenges that lay ahead. Chef Daniel's absence lingered, but she sensed it wouldn't be long before he returned with a vengeance. When the staff began to trickle in, Grace gathered them for a meeting in the kitchen. She could see the spark of determination in their eyes, reflecting the spirit of unity that had taken hold. "Listen up, everyone," Grace said, her voice steady. "We've made great strides, but I know Chef Daniel will be back to challenge us. We need to be ready for whatever he throws our way. Let's keep our momentum going." Marco nodded. "We should keep pushing those new dishes. If we can keep impressing the guests, he'll have no choice but to see our worth." "Yes," Sarah added, her enthusiasm infectious. "Let's create a weekly special that showcases our heritage. We can incorporate flavors and techniques from our backgrounds." With each suggestion, the energy in the room surged. Grace felt a sense of exhilaration wash over her. Their passion for food was igniting a fire within her as well, a determination to prove that they were more than just a team. They were a family. In the following weeks, the restaurant became a whirlwind of creativity. The team worked late into the nights, experimenting with new dishes and tasting each other's creations. The walls of La Perfection buzzed with energy as they crafted a special menu that highlighted their diverse backgrounds. Grace guided them, fostering a safe space for ideas to flourish without the heavy hand of Chef Daniel looming over them. They introduced vibrant dishes inspired by their cultures. A creamy risotto with saffron and seafood from Marco's Italian heritage, spicy kimchi pancakes from Sarah's Korean roots, and savory empanadas filled with spiced meats and vegetables from Alex's Argentinian background. Each dish told a story, weaving together the threads of their lives into a cohesive tapestry. The restaurant began to attract a new clientele, curious food enthusiasts eager to experience the innovative flavors that had emerged from La Perfection. The buzz around town grew louder, fueled by social media and glowing reviews from food critics. The staff felt like artists unveiling their masterpieces, pouring their hearts into every plate they served. But the shadows of Chef Daniel's presence loomed large, and it wasn't long before he returned to the kitchen, his demeanor colder than ever. His eyes were like daggers as he surveyed the space, noting the changes that had taken place in his absence. "Is this a kitchen or a circus?" he scoffed, crossing his arms. "I see you've all taken to playing chef while I was gone. It's pathetic." The atmosphere shifted, the laughter that once echoed now replaced by an uneasy silence. Grace stepped forward, ready to defend her team. "Chef, we've worked hard to create something special. Our guests are responding positively, and we want to continue evolving the menu." Chef Daniel's lips curled into a sneer. "Evolving? This isn't a cooking school. This is my restaurant. You're all here to follow orders, not to push your whims on my menu." His words were a cold slap, but Grace held her ground. "It's not just about you anymore, Chef. It's about all of us. We've come together as a team, and we believe in what we're creating." The other cooks rallied behind her, their expressions resolute. "We're not afraid of your criticism anymore," Marco added, his voice steady. "We're proud of our work." Chef Daniel glared at them, searching for the cracks in their newfound confidence. "You think you can run this place without me? You'll ruin it. I built this restaurant from the ground up." "But we've made it better," Sarah interjected, her tone unwavering. "You may have built it, but it's time for it to grow." For a moment, the kitchen seemed to hang in the balance, a taut string ready to snap. Grace felt the weight of every cook's gaze, their hopes resting on her shoulders. "Enough." Chef Daniel's voice cut through the tension. "You'll all regret this foolishness. I will not allow you to destroy what I've created." With that, he turned on his heel and stormed out, leaving the kitchen buzzing with anxiety. Grace could see the uncertainty flickering in her team's eyes, but she refused to let it overshadow their hard work. "Listen," Grace said, her voice rising above the murmurs. "We've come too far to turn back now. This is our restaurant too, and we will stand strong together. We've created something beautiful, and we're not letting anyone tear it down." The team nodded, their determination rekindled. They were no longer afraid of Chef Daniel. They were ready to face whatever came next. As days turned into weeks, La Perfection transformed. Each night, the kitchen thrummed with creativity, and the dining room filled with guests eager to taste the new culinary offerings. The staff had become a well-oiled machine, working in harmony, their laughter and chatter filling the air. Yet, Chef Daniel continued to sabotage their efforts from behind the scenes, making snide remarks during service and enforcing a reign of fear. He would dismiss the new dishes, insisting on returning to the classics, determined to erase the changes his team had worked so hard to implement. During one particularly busy Friday night, as the restaurant swelled with patrons, Chef Daniel's temper flared. A table of guests had sent a dish back, claiming it was undercooked. In his fury, he screamed for Marco, blaming him for the failure. "You think you can just throw things together and call it fine dining? Get it together, or I'll make sure you're out on the street." The kitchen fell silent, tension crackling like static in the air. Marco's face blanched, and Grace felt the surge of anger boiling within her. This was not the environment they had created together. "Chef," she called out, stepping forward, "this isn't right. Marco is doing his best, and so are we. We're a team, and we support each other." Daniel's eyes widened, his mouth twitching in disbelief. "A team? This is my kitchen. You're nothing without my guidance." "But that's where you're wrong," Grace asserted, her heart racing. "We're learning from each other, and we're growing stronger. We can't let fear dictate our work." The other staff rallied behind her, their voices rising in support. "We're proud of what we've built," Marco shouted, and the team echoed his sentiment, their voices swelling with unity. Chef Daniel's fury flared, but for the first time, he found himself outnumbered. The very foundation of his authority was crumbling, and he sensed it. "You're all fools," he spat. "You'll regret this. I'll make sure of it." With that, he stormed out of the kitchen, slamming the door behind him. The kitchen erupted into cheers, the tension that had suffocated them for so long finally giving way to the exhilaration of standing up for themselves. "Did we just do that?" Sarah asked, her eyes wide with disbelief and excitement. "Yes, we did." Grace grinned, her heart soaring. "This is our kitchen now. We've proven that we can stand together against anyone, even Chef Daniel." As they celebrated their triumph, Grace knew the battle was far from over. Chef Daniel wouldn't give up easily, and she had to be prepared for his next move. But with her team by her side, she felt more confident than ever. They were ready to take on whatever challenges awaited them, united in their passion for food and each other. The next day, Grace gathered the staff once more. "We need to think about our future. We've shown we can thrive together, but we also need to be ready for Chef Daniel's retaliation. What do we do next?" "We could plan a special event," Alex suggested. "Something that showcases our new dishes and brings the community together." "Great idea," Marco replied enthusiastically. "A tasting event could draw in more guests and help establish our identity." With excitement coursing through them, they brainstormed ideas for a unity tasting night, a special evening where they would present their favorite dishes, highlight their diverse culinary roots, and invite local food bloggers and critics to experience their creations. As the event date approached, the kitchen buzzed with activity. Grace delegated tasks to each member, ensuring everyone had a role in bringing their vision to life. They designed colorful menus, arranged for live music, and created an inviting atmosphere filled with warmth and laughter. The Unity Tasting Night. The night of the Unity Tasting arrived, transforming La Perfection into a vibrant celebration of food and culture. Banners adorned with colorful designs decorated the walls, reflecting the diverse backgrounds of the staff. The smell of herbs and spices wafted through the air, mingling with the soft notes of live music played by a local acoustic duo. Grace stood at the entrance, her heart racing with excitement and anxiety as guests began to arrive. Tonight is about showcasing what we can create as a team, she reminded herself, smoothing the apron around her waist. This is our moment. As the restaurant filled with guests, a palpable energy enveloped the space. Local food critics and bloggers mingled with friends and families, eager to sample the unique dishes crafted by the team. The first course, a delicate saffron-infused risotto with seared scallops, was a resounding success, eliciting delighted gasps and compliments that echoed throughout the dining area. Grace watched her team flourish. Marco moved with a newfound confidence, plating dishes with precision and flair. Sarah, too, shone in her role, effortlessly engaging with guests and sharing the stories behind each dish. The atmosphere was electric, charged with laughter and camaraderie as patrons savored each bite. But in the midst of the celebration, Chef Daniel lurked in the shadows, his presence a dark cloud over the event. He had remained silent until now, watching from the sidelines, his expression a mix of disdain and disbelief. He had underestimated Grace and her team, thinking their unity would falter at the first sign of challenge. As the second course, a spicy kimchi pancake with smoked salmon, was served, Chef Daniel made his move. He strode into the dining area, his posture rigid and commanding, drawing attention away from the cheerful atmosphere. "What is going on here?" he barked, his voice slicing through the laughter like a knife. "This isn't a food festival. It's a disgrace." Guests turned in surprise, their smiles faltering at the sudden shift in tone. Grace's stomach knotted. She had hoped that the event would showcase their achievements and symbolize their growth, not devolve into a confrontation. "We're showcasing our team's creativity and heritage, Chef," Grace said, stepping forward to confront him. "This is a celebration of what we can do together." "Together," he scoffed. "This is a farce. You think you can run a restaurant on whimsy and amateur dishes? You're embarrassing yourselves." The tension in the room grew thicker, and guests began to murmur amongst themselves. Marco stepped up beside Grace, his jaw set in defiance. "We've put our heart and soul into this night. People are enjoying it. Why can't you just accept that?" Chef Daniel's eyes narrowed, his nostrils flaring. "Enjoying what? Overcooked nonsense. Your little festival is nothing more than a joke." Grace felt a wave of anger surge within her. "These dishes represent who we are, Chef. We're proud of them, and we're proud of each other. You may have built this restaurant, but we are the ones keeping it alive." A tense silence fell over the room, and for a moment, Grace feared they would lose their guests' attention. But then, one brave diner stood up. "I've tasted your food, and it's incredible. You've all done an amazing job tonight." More voices joined in, praising the team and their culinary creations. The restaurant erupted in applause, drowning out Chef Daniel's protests. His face darkened as he realized he was losing control, and it enraged him. "This is absurd. You'll ruin this restaurant," he shouted, but his words were lost in the overwhelming support for Grace and her team. "Look around, Chef. This is what we've created," Sarah exclaimed, her voice full of passion. "We're bringing people together through our food. Isn't that what a restaurant is supposed to do?" With every word spoken, the tide turned further against Chef Daniel. He realized he was standing alone against the collective strength of his former staff, who had come together in defiance of his oppressive tactics. Feeling cornered, Chef Daniel made a final desperate attempt to reclaim his authority. "You think you can run this place without me? I'll make sure this is your last night." But as he turned to storm out, Grace called after him, her voice firm. "If you think we can't succeed without you, you're mistaken. This restaurant is ours now. We're not afraid of you anymore." The door swung shut behind him, and the atmosphere shifted. Cheers erupted, and the restaurant was filled with renewed energy. Grace felt a rush of relief and exhilaration, knowing they had stood their ground. "Now let's finish this night strong," Grace shouted, raising her hands to rally her team. "Back to work, everyone. We have guests to impress." The kitchen roared back to life, and the staff leaped into action, their spirits high. They pushed through the remaining courses with a fervor that was both infectious and inspiring. The food flowed like a symphony, each dish showcasing the talents and backgrounds of every team member. As the last course, a decadent chocolate torte with chili-infused whipped cream was served, Grace took a moment to survey the room. Laughter and joy filled the air, and the diners were captivated by the creativity and passion on their plates. The sense of community she had hoped to cultivate had come to life, not just among the staff, but also with their guests. After dinner, Grace gathered everyone together for a moment of reflection. The energy in the room was electric, filled with pride and accomplishment. "I can't thank you all enough for what you've done tonight," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "We stood together against everything that tried to tear us apart. This is just the beginning." As they raised their glasses in a toast to unity, the spirit of camaraderie filled the air once more. The taste of victory was sweet, and they reveled in the success they had forged together. However, Grace knew that while they had triumphed for now, Chef Daniel wouldn't stay away forever. The journey ahead would be filled with challenges, but she was prepared to face them head-on with her team by her side. They had proven that they could create something extraordinary when united, and no one, not even Chef Daniel, could take that away from them. In the days following the Unity tasting, the buzz around La Perfection only grew. Social media lit up with posts praising the restaurant's innovative new dishes and the atmosphere of joy that had radiated throughout the tasting night. Food bloggers flocked to the restaurant, eager to experience the magic for themselves. Reservations surged, and the restaurant quickly became a hot spot in the city. Grace's heart swelled with pride as she witnessed her team flourish under the renewed interest. They were no longer a group of cooks confined to the shadows of Chef Daniel's reign. They were a family, a force to be reckoned with. But even as the restaurant thrived, the specter of Chef Daniel loomed in the background. Grace could feel the tension in the air, a palpable sense of anticipation. She knew he would come back, angrier and more determined than ever to reclaim his position of power. One evening, as the team prepared for service, Grace received a text from a friend who had been following Chef Daniel's movements closely. "He's planning something big," the message read. "He's not going to go down without a fight." Panic surged through her. "Team, I need your attention," Grace called, gathering everyone in the kitchen. The atmosphere shifted, the laughter and chatter quieting as her team focused on her. "We need to prepare ourselves. Chef Daniel is plotting something. I don't know what it is, but we have to be ready for anything." The group exchanged worried glances, but Marco's voice cut through the tension. "We're ready, Grace. We've proven we can take on anything he throws at us. Together." With determination in her heart, Grace nodded. "Exactly. We've come too far to let him intimidate us again. Let's keep pushing forward. We'll strengthen our menu, keep innovating, and show him that we're not backing down." As the weeks rolled by, the restaurant became a hive of creativity and energy. The team worked tirelessly, constantly refining their dishes and pushing the envelope of culinary excellence. The atmosphere was electric, fueled by a shared sense of purpose. But the shadow of Chef Daniel remained ever present. Rumors began circulating about his plans for a rival restaurant, one that would supposedly eclipse La Perfection and reclaim the culinary spotlight. The thought of his return ignited a fire within Grace. She knew they couldn't allow him to succeed. Determined to stay ahead, she and the team developed a strategy to highlight their uniqueness. They focused on building relationships with their community and established partnerships with local farmers and artisans to source ingredients. Each dish told a story not just about the team, but also about the land, the people, and the cultures that inspire them. As La Perfection continued to thrive, Grace found herself reflecting on her journey. What had started as a struggle for survival had transformed into a movement. They were no longer just a restaurant. They had become a beacon of hope and resilience in the culinary world. But one fateful evening, as they prepared for another bustling dinner service, the storm they had anticipated finally broke. Chef Daniel burst through the kitchen door, his eyes ablaze with fury and determination. "Grace," he shouted, his voice echoing off the walls. "You think you can take my name and tarnish it with your childish antics? I'll show you what a real chef can do." The room froze, and Grace felt the chef's duel. The tension in the kitchen was palpable as Chef Daniel stood at the doorway, a whirlwind of fury and disdain. Grace felt the weight of the moment, knowing this was not just an ordinary confrontation. It was a challenge, a clash of ideals, skill, and the very future of La Perfection. "Chef Daniel," she said, her voice steady but firm, "this isn't your kitchen anymore. You've had your chance, and you squandered it. We're here to create something new, something beautiful." "Beautiful?" he sneered, stepping further into the kitchen, his presence a dark shadow over the bright energy that had filled the space. "You think this is beautiful? A bunch of amateurs playing chef. You've built a fragile empire on dreams and whimsy, and I'm here to shatter it." The staff exchanged anxious glances, uncertainty flickering in their eyes. Marco clenched his fists, ready to defend their hard-won reputation, but Grace held up a hand to keep him calm. "If you want to fight, Chef Daniel, then let's do it the right way. A cook-off. You and me. Winner takes all." A murmur of surprise rippled through the kitchen. Chef Daniel's eyes narrowed, weighing her challenge with skepticism. "You think you can beat me? After everything I've done? Fine. Let's see what you've got. But when I win, this place is mine again." "Agreed," Grace replied, her resolve hardening. "Let's make it a showcase of our best dishes. We'll invite the critics, the food bloggers, and the community. They'll decide who reigns supreme." Chef Daniel smirked, a glimmer of confidence flashing across his face. "You're on, Grace. Prepare to be humiliated." As he stormed out, the team erupted into a flurry of activity. "Did he just challenge us to a cook-off?" Sarah asked, wide-eyed. "Yes," Grace replied, her heart pounding with adrenaline. "And we're going to show him what La Perfection really stands for. We need to start planning immediately. This is our moment to shine." The next few days were a whirlwind of preparation and excitement. Word spread like wildfire through the community, and the event quickly gained traction. Local food critics, bloggers, and enthusiasts reserved their spots, buzzing with anticipation. The energy in La Perfection was electric, and each member of the team felt the weight of responsibility. Grace knew this was not just a culinary competition. It was a chance to redefine their identity as a restaurant and a team. She gathered everyone in the kitchen to brainstorm ideas for their dishes. "This is our opportunity to showcase not just our skills, but our stories. Let's think outside the box and create something truly remarkable." They spent hours discussing concepts, flavors, and presentation. Marco proposed a dish inspired by his grandmother's traditional Italian recipes, while Sarah suggested a fusion dish that combined her Asian heritage with classic French techniques. Grace listened intently, encouraging each member to contribute their unique voice. "I want to incorporate my heritage into this," Marco said, enthusiasm lighting up his face. "How about a handmade ravioli filled with roasted butternut squash, drizzled with sage brown butter?" "That sounds incredible," Grace exclaimed. "And what if we paired that with a wild mushroom consomme? It'll highlight the flavors while adding depth." "I've got an idea too," Sarah chimed in. "What if we do a spicy miso glaze on grilled vegetables, served with a coconut rice? It will be vibrant and flavorful, showcasing the best of my culture." As the ideas flowed, the menu began to take shape, each dish reflecting their diverse backgrounds and the collective spirit of unity they had fostered. Grace felt a sense of pride wash over her as she witnessed her team come alive, their passions intertwining into a beautiful tapestry of flavors. Meanwhile, Chef Daniel was busy planning his counterattack. He had no intention of allowing Grace and her team to gain the upper hand. In his mind, it was not merely about winning. It was about proving that he was still the best chef in the city. His plan included a series of classic dishes that he believed would impress the critics, showcasing his culinary pedigree and experience. He spent countless hours honing his skills, pushing himself to create flawless presentations and flavors that would overshadow Grace's innovative creations. The day of the cook-off arrived, and La Perfection transformed into a battleground of culinary prowess. The kitchen buzzed with excitement and nervous energy, a stark contrast to the polished exterior of the restaurant, now filled with guests eager to witness the showdown. In the dining area, rows of tables were filled with the city's most influential food critics and enthusiastic diners, all clamoring to catch a glimpse of the action. Grace felt a rush of nerves as she scanned the crowd, but determination quickly took over. "Let's do this," she rallied her team. "We've worked too hard to let fear hold us back. We're not just cooking for ourselves, we're cooking for each other and for everyone who believes in us." With the signal given, the competition began. Grace and her team dove into action, chopping, sautéing, and plating with a sense of urgency and purpose. Marco led the pasta station, rolling out sheets of dough with precision. Sarah handled the grill, her instincts guiding her as she flipped vegetables and monitored the miso glaze. As they worked, Grace's focus sharpened. She had envisioned this moment, and now it was unfolding exactly as she had hoped. The kitchen was a symphony of collaboration, each member contributing their strengths to create something extraordinary. Across the room, Chef Daniel was a whirlwind of chaos. He barked orders at his team, trying to maintain control as he raced against the clock. But with each passing moment, it became clear that his approach was not resonating with his crew. The tension in his kitchen was palpable, and the cracks began to show. "Come on, move faster," he shouted, his frustration boiling over. "This is pathetic. We're supposed to be the best." But his team seemed overwhelmed by his aggression, their morale sinking as the atmosphere turned toxic. They struggled to keep up with his demands, leading to mistakes and mishaps that further escalated his rage. Meanwhile, Grace's team was thriving. With each dish they prepared, the excitement in the dining area grew. The guests were captivated, eagerly anticipating each course. As they plated the first dish, a stunning presentation of ravioli drizzled in sage-brown butter, Marco beamed with pride. "Let's go," he shouted, rushing to the dining area to serve the first course. The reaction was instantaneous. Gasps of delight filled the air as guests savored the flavors and textures. Compliments flowed, and the energy shifted in the restaurant. Grace felt a surge of confidence. They were on the right path. As the courses continued to roll out, Grace found herself momentarily distracted by the chaos unfolding in Chef Daniel's kitchen. His team seemed to be struggling, and she couldn't help but feel a pang of sympathy. It was clear that his aggressive tactics were backfiring, and she wondered how it had come to this. Two chefs who had once been colleagues now pitted against each other in a battle of wills. Finally, after the third course, a vibrant dish of grilled vegetables with coconut rice, she caught a glimpse of Chef Daniel through the open kitchen doorway. He stood there, his face twisted in anger, shouting at one of his cooks for a simple mistake. "Get it together. I don't have time for this nonsense," he barked, his voice echoing through the bustling restaurant. The moment felt surreal, and a thought crossed Grace's mind. This isn't what being a chef is about. She turned back to her team, her heart swelling with pride. They were not just cooking. They were sharing a piece of themselves with the world, something far more valuable than mere accolades or titles. As the cook-off continued, Grace and her team pressed on, their camaraderie fueling their creativity. The final course approached, and they knew they wanted to make a statement. Grace suggested they create a dessert that embodied the essence of La Perfection, a fusion of flavors that celebrated their diverse heritages. "How about a spiced chocolate torte with layers of green tea mousse and a raspberry coulis?" she proposed, excitement igniting her voice. "It'll be a perfect representation of all of us." "Let's do it," Sarah cheered, already brainstorming how to present it beautifully. As they crafted the dessert, the kitchen filled with the intoxicating aroma of melted chocolate and exotic spices. It was a labor of love, each element meticulously prepared and artfully arranged. When they finally plated the dish, it was a masterpiece, a stunning creation that promised to leave a lasting impression. With their final dish complete, Grace glanced over at Chef Daniel's kitchen. He appeared to be unraveling, his frustration boiling over as he hurled insults at his team. The chaos surrounding him felt like a reflection of his own insecurities, and she realized that his aggression stemmed from fear, a fear of being forgotten in a world that was evolving beyond him. As Grace's team made their way to the dining area with a final course, she paused to address her crew. "No matter what happens tonight, I want each of you to remember this moment. We've come together and created something beautiful, and that's what matters most." The team nodded, their faces alight with determination. They stepped into the dining room, presenting their spiced chocolate torte to the eager guests. As they served the dessert, the crowd erupted in applause, the energy in the room reaching a fever pitch. The critics savored each bite, nodding in approval as they delighted in the intricate flavors and textures. Grace could feel